You're listening to The Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and Jonelle Elgoway.
Good evening and welcome to The Doctor's Corner on Call 360 Network. I'm your co-host Jonelle Elgoway. If you have a question tonight for Dr. Kline or our special guest Mike James on the topic of pharmacies, please call in at 415-915-2291. You can also chat live with our audience on YouTube channel Conspiracies Against Wellness live stream. Our special guest, Mike James, is a community and consultant pharmacist who owns and operates PSP Pharmacy in Raleigh, North Carolina. Mr. James is Vice President and Director of Governmental Affairs for the Association of Community Pharmacists and Mutual Wholesale Drug. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Kline and special guest Mike James to the Doctor's Corner. How are you both this evening?
I'm just dandy.
Good, very well, thank you.
Okay. Mike, would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself besides what I just mentioned?
Well, I've been practicing pharmacy for many years and have owned several drugstores over the years, and basically have looked at pharmacy for the same reason I went into pharmacy. It's pharmacy gives you the ability to help people, help them understand their healthcare needs, and certainly help direct them in a way they need to be traveling for problems that may exist. And I'd always wanted to be in pharmacy for that reason. And then I think I grew up with my father in another business, not a pharmacy business, but I think that's where I wound up kind of getting the real insight for business. And so constantly this is a combination between those two things. And as time went by, I got more and more involved in what was going in what I refer to as the politics of pharmacy. And for that reason, I've been highly involved over the last 20 years probably with legislative issues and congressional issues that directly affect pharmacy.
Now, you're an independent pharmacist, is that correct?
That is correct. That is absolutely correct, yeah.
I'm
in the business, what we all used to refer to as the corner drugstore.
Yeah, believe it or not, before we talked over the past 40 years, I've always recommended that my patients go to an independent pharmacist. And the reason for that is I respect the fact they're running businesses because I come from a business family. But more important, according to Consumer Report, you get better prices, and I found you get better service. So do you you kind of agree with that, or do you think the?
I totally concur. Yes.
That you apparently are not a chain pharmacy, so. We did a little poll on Twitter. We have 20,000 people following us on Twitter. And we asked them, have you had problems with the pharmacies getting your prescriptions filled? 40% said they were having problems with chain pharmacies. 1% said they were having problems with independent pharmacies. So that reiterates my stamp of approval. So I'm glad you're here to tell us about issues regarding independent pharmacies and pharmacy issues in general. So did
well, I think that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Your turn. No, we're on the radio. It's hard.
I think we're a little delayed, right?
Yeah.
It is a scenario that I think you're exactly right on, and I think one of the things that I feel was so important about the independent pharmacy is that. As a person becomes a regular patient or customer in an independent pharmacy, what you find is that it not only becomes a pharmacist-patient relationship, but it also becomes a friend relationship in the fact that you get to know that patient and that patient gets to know you. And so I've always felt as a pharmacist that if a patient goes to, and it doesn't matter what pharmacy it is, as long as they have that personal relationship with the pharmacist, that as they get to know that pharmacist, they find that he's calling them at home and asking them about their situation, the condition. He's calling them at home, asking to make sure that they're taking their medication properly. And it just winds up being a good relationship, and I think you certainly don't find that in the chain environment. Kind of gets back to that same scenario where when you go in, they know you, and it works out much better that way.
The old-fashioned druggist. I'm dealing with an independent pharmacist here, and one of my patients is in Goldsboro, and he couldn't come and pick up his fentanyl patches, and they're sensitive to the heat. And as you know, we live in the South. So this pharmacist sent his courier all the way to Goldsboro without me asking and without the patient asking, just to avoid putting it in the mail in the heat. Now, that's the kind of thing I think independent pharmacists do. But how are you affected, you guys as independent pharmacists, by all this business with these benefit managers? And maybe explain to everyone, including me, because it's kind of fuzzy to me what goes on with these people and how they got into this position.
All right, if I begin to explain this and I get too far in the weeds, just please interrupt me if you don't mind. So,
all right.
A pharmacy benefit manager is a middleman that is between your plan benefit sponsor, such as an IBM or whoever you happen to be working for that provides insurance coverage. And so these people have gone to these pharmacy benefit managers and said, help us with our pharmacy process. So, there's millions of prescriptions filled every year, and what really makes it more convenient for that IBM type company is that they can have one entity that's handling all those prescriptions, and they write one check to that entity to pay for those prescriptions instead of having 20,000 pharmacies send them a bill every month. And so this is how these people got started as a pharmacy benefit administrator, and then they realized they could make a lot of money doing this, and so then they became pharmacy benefit managers. And what is the problem we have in our world today is that they have gotten so entrenched and they're so well financially supported, both at the business level and at the congressional level, that they're pretty much dictating what happens. So when you, Dr. Kline, write a prescription for a medication that they don't want to handle because they're not getting the adequate rebate back from the manufacturer on that particular drug, then they make you do what's called a prior approval. And I'm sure you're quite familiar with those, in the fact that they're saying now the doctor's got to call and verify why that person needs that particular drug. And if they don't want to do that, then they just say you have to prescribe something else. And so it becomes a very difficult situation. But they're also doing other things that are atrocious as far as we're concerned from the pharmacy side, because we see it every day. And they're doing things like clawback. So a clawback is a situation in which you get a prescription filled and your copay should be $10 at the register when you check your prescription out. And instead of it being $10, it's $20 or it's $25. And so what's happening is that we check you out at the register and you pay us $25 when your copay should have been $10, and then they keep the spread. So they're doubling up on the copay, or even sometimes tripling up on the copay, and they're taking the difference in what you should be paying versus what you're actually paying.
So who monitors these people? How do they get away with this?
Nobody monitors, and that's the problem. There's no state laws that govern PBMs, and there's no federal laws that govern PBMs. And we've been fighting for a long time in Congress, trying to get some legislation passed that would actually put these people under the guidelines of the federal government or CMS. And even our state, in North Carolina, for example, our our insurance commissioner has no control over these people because they're either ERISA companies, which means they're self-insured, or they have been chartered at the federal level, which takes them out of the purview of the basic state authorities here. So consequently, there's no control at all. There's no one saying you can't do this. There's no one saying you can do this. And it becomes a very difficult situation. And it's one of those things that the general public, the patient, is not aware of. They have no idea because these people have always used their crutch to be, we're out there negotiating better prices and saving money, when in fact they're doing just the opposite of that.
So it's healthcare profiteering.
It is exactly right, without a doubt. And if anybody questions that being true, all they have to do is go on the internet and look up the financial statements for people like Caremark, which is CVS. CVS is what most people think of CVS is a corner drugstore. what CVS actually is a company called Caremark, which is a pharmacy benefit manager. And so if you look at their end-of-year statements and you look at their profit and loss, and you look at, there's another company called Express Scripts, and there's another company called Optimum, and those three companies process 85% of all the prescriptions that are processed in the country that are on insurance.
Before
so
they had
mega companies.
Before they had benefit managers and you were in business, was there the problem of pharmacies denying people with valid prescriptions as saying, no, I can't fill this, or no, we don't have his medicine anymore? Is it from the benefit managers? Yeah. So
go ahead.
So if we eliminated the benefit managers, we might have no one or very little problem of pharmacists saying, sorry, can't fill your prescription.
You would have that, plus you would have billions of dollars in savings, and you would see the patient having to pay a whole lot less for their medicines. One of the things that happens here is that everybody looks at the manufacturers and said it's all the faults of the manufacturers that we're having these high prices on drugs. Well, what's actually happening here is that these PBMs wind up saying, as I referred a while ago, to the manufacturer, if you want your medication to be on our formulary, bearing in mind that the three of them are doing 85% of all the prescriptions, if you want this drug to be on our formulary, then you're going to have to give us a rebate that we say that we'll take in order to list your drug on the formulary. If you don't list your drug on the formulary, then we're not going to let them go out to those millions of people that we take care of every day. And so the manufacturer then comes back and does the rebate. And what happens, as you might guess, is that when they are hit for the rebate, then they just increase the price of the drug to counteract that rebate they've lost. So
this is market force
to be driven up.
Yeah, it's market force manipulation.
Someone on YouTube asked,
exactly right.
How do we do that? How do we eliminate them?
Well, I think what happens, I think now we've gotten a little traction in Congress over the last 6 or 8 months, and you may or may not have seen some of this in the news, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to say to the congressional people, if you're trying to save money on healthcare costs, then you need to look at this and figure out how you're going to wind up saying, we don't really need you people in the middle here. I mean, we didn't have them in the middle before. And when I say before, I'm talking 1990, 1992, 93 is when they really came into their own. And so as they grew over the years, they just became a bigger factor in the pricing structure. So what the federal government needs to do, particularly in Medicare Part D, for example, which is a huge amount of dollars that the feds are spending that they don't need to be spending, they just take them out of the cycle. They go back to the premise where they wind up processing the scripts, and they wind up taking away this forced price figure that they're demanding on a day-to-day basis from the manufacturer, and that will wind up itself lowering the cost. If I'm not mistaken, and don't hold me to this, but I think the number last year of rebates ran into several $billions, and I'm trying to say 153 or something like that. So it's a lot of money.
So if we
take that out of the
go ahead.
No, yeah, I was going to say you take that out of the equation, and then you've got a huge amount of money that you can put back into health care to save the patient who walks in the pharmacy or walks in the doctor's office money. I mean, it's just that simple.
So Jonelle and I went to Washington, D.C., and we talked to some legislators and their staff. So basically, we were acting as lobbyists.
Right.
A lobbyist is a person who represents a group. We were representing people with painful diseases, and you represent independent pharmacists in Congress as a lobbyist. Now, you know, lobbyists are not all crooks, and I don't think Jonelle and I would consider ourselves crooks. No. And same for you. A lobbyist is a salesperson, I guess. So if you approach a senator who doesn't know much about what's going on with the patients being harmed, you know, by not having their prescriptions filled, pharmacists being harmed by having their businesses run into the ground. So what are the first points that you bring up with a senator or a House member to try to get the ball rolling to get rid of these people? Because I remember you telling me before, if we ran it all like Medicaid, it'd be fine. So that told me that sounds like get rid of these benefit managers wouldn't make a hoot of difference, except things would improve. But what are the key points that you bring up with the legislators that we can then use, in our tweets and when people go to talk to their legislators?
In your earlier part of the question, you said something very important. That is, when you talk to the senators or to the members of the House, you have to remember that these people come from a wide range of backgrounds. You may have lawyers, but you also may have farmers. You may have businessmen. You may have doctors. So you have a lot of different backgrounds that don't necessarily relate to what we're discussing here. And so when you go in to talk to those folks, you have to talk on the level that they will understand, in the fact that you're trying to help them understand that what you're looking at while we're lobbying for independent pharmacy, we're also lobbying for the patient. Because the patient is a person at the very beginning of this is getting into trouble because of healthcare problems, and they can't afford it, or they don't have the ability to do the things they need to do. And so the first thing I start talking about when I sit down with a senator is what's going on with his constituents back home, and here's how they're being affected by what's happening with the PBMs and what's happening in healthcare. And the second thing I talk to him about is what we've just been talking about, and that's the money that's involved. Because as you talk to the current representatives up there, they're all interested in saving money and putting together a better formula for healthcare by saving money. And we kind of go through those steps to help them understand how that could happen and what could be done. The problem that you have with members of Congress and even members of the legislature is the fact that you have to leave them with the understanding of what you're talking about, because if you get too involved in it, they just kind of tune you out because they don't understand all the things you're talking about. So we try to make it straight up and simple to them so that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, as opposed to having to do multiplication tables or something to understand what we're happening. So that's kind of the way we approach it. I approach it directly myself in that manner, and I think what that does for us is that gives them the logic that they relate directly to the people they're thinking about, who are their constituents back home, and how it's affecting their district directly or their state directly, and what they would have to do to try to solve that problem. And it's tough, as you know, because you've been there. And when you have you have these major PBMs spending, we used to joke that the PBMs had one lobbyist for every member of Congress, so that when something came up, they could immediately start doing something to stop it.
That's the problem, when you start making a lot of money, you can hire a lot of expensive lobbyists. But if would it be fair for me as a non-pharmacist to speak up for pharmacies in order that my patients get proper care, that the benefit managers started out as a good idea and now it's a bad idea? And if they dropped out of sight, not only would we save X billion dollars, but we would have a lot of constituents a lot happier about filling their prescriptions. Would that be fair to say something like that?
That would absolutely be fair, and I'll give you a good example of the cost factor and how that works. You're aware of all the generics that we've had come on the market in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. We've had some major, years ago we tracked and actually proved that one of the PBMs was charging, remember Lipitor when it was a brand? Mm-hmm. It was, quote, the best drug in the world at the time because it was one of the leaders in the cholesterol fight. And so we proved at that time that this PBM was forcing them to pay them $20 as a rebate for every prescription written for Lipitor across the country.
Wow.
So you can imagine how much money that wound up being very quickly. So what we see now is we see a whole litany of really good drugs that have gone generic, which theoretically is a good thing because it lowers the price of the medication, and it's much more affordable to the customer. However, what some of these companies have done now is, PBMs have done now, is they said, okay, this drug has gone generic, but we prefer for the brand to continue to be dispensed. And the reason that is because the company is giving them a huge rebate to continue
they're in complete control.
Yeah.
They're in complete control.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so now when I fill a prescription for a patient, and I should be dispensing their generic because their copay will be much less and it'll be a less cost to their insurance company, it's turned down and rejected and said, we do not pay for this, you have to dispense the brand.
Now,
and
what
so
kind
now
of
the
patient
choice is either dispense the brand.
Now, how does the patient know this is going on?
Well, they don't. See, that's the whole problem. And another part of this problem is that in our contracts, and everybody, the PBMs will tell you that they negotiate with pharmacies to get the best price and dispense the best medication and so forth. Well, actually, your definition and my definition of negotiate is not their definition of negotiate. You know, you and I think that if you're going to negotiate, you and I sit down across the table and we come to a decision and we both walk away, maybe not totally happy, but pleased that we put together a negotiation and come to a decision. Negotiations with PBMs is very simple, and that is we're going to send you a contract to the pharmacy. Either you take it or those patients can't come to your pharmacy to get their prescriptions filled.
Yeah, this reminds me of the guy with the black mask on, you know, and the axe.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And so then when the patient comes in, you adjudicate that claim form, and they tell us what we're supposed to charge that patient as a copay, and that's the transaction.
So if a patient goes...
Go
ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. What's your question?
It's this delay on the mic makes it difficult, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I guess what? I'm interrupting you. So if patients go to we tell patients to, make appointments and go in. So if they're bringing up the pharmacy issue, I think a lot of legislators don't know what to do about it. They would like to help out, but what do I do? So I think if we equipped people with, if you get rid of the benefit managers, we'll get better service. And according to, what we know, it looks like the federal government's going to save. Now, how much can we tell them? Can we? You got a figure you guys have worked up?
Yeah, we could tell them easily that if the federal government itself, if they got rid of the benefit managers, would save probably in excess of $3 to $4 billion a year.
And then the patients themselves, who are paying higher prices for things they could get a lot cheaper. Any guess on that?
That's correct.
Another billion, maybe?
Probably, at least $1 billion. Yeah.
All right, so we're talking
what's interesting about these contracts. Let me just say this. What's interesting about these contracts I was discussing there was the fact that even in the contract, they have language in there that says, I, the pharmacist, cannot discuss the pricing with the patient, nor they could get the product less if they just paid cash for it. That's important. They have a gag clause in there. Yeah.
Can you pay cash for pain medication? Well, are you allowed to?
Yes, you're allowed to pay cash for it. I mean, you as a patient can come to me and say, I have XYZ insurance, and my copay is $60. And you can ask me, what would that drug cost me if I paid cash for it? And I tell you it's going to cost you $40, and you can say, well, I want to pay cash.
Okay. What if my health...
as a pharmacist, discuss that with you as an initial conversation.
What if my health insurance, say if I have Medicare or Medicaid, will not cover it? Will you still allow me to fill the prescription if I wanted to pay cash and not go through them?
Oh, sure, yeah. If your insurance doesn't cover it, certainly I'll let you pay cash.
Okay.
I'm not going to keep you from getting your medication, no.
Yeah, that's as doctors, one of the things we don't know is how much things cost. We have no idea what it costs to get your gallbladder out. Exactly. We have no idea. I just found out the other day that generic OxyContin is $900 a month. The generic, So anyway, one of the things I do as a physician is talk to the pharmacists and figure out the best value, which is a ratio between effectiveness and cost.
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
then if the patients get stuck paying cash, they can continue with the same medicine. And if they have to pay, they're not going to go
Correct.
broke paying like $900 a month, for OxyContin or oxycodone extended release, which is a nice drug, but it's not worth $900,
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. You make a great point there because. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Please finish.
I'm just saying you make a great point there because a lot of times you'll get a doc who will write a script, and to your point, they do not understand what the cost is, particularly if they've done a good job of detailing them from the manufacturer and it's the best drug that's ever come out, so to speak. And so they want to use that drug because they want the patient to have the best treatment possible. Only problem is the drug costs $700. And so, as you said, if that person's paying cash, they will not get that prescription filled. And then when they come back to you as a patient and they're not better or they're worse, you think the drug is not working.
Yeah,
So
I just
now
thought
you
of
wind
it.
up changing it. Yeah.
I just thought of an idea. A lot of times patients go down to the pharmacy with their prescription, and then the pharmacist, that'll be $800. Well, how come my doctor didn't tell me? Well, my doctor didn't tell me because he didn't know. And so that's maybe a role for independent pharmacists, is to make a list of the most commonly prescribed drugs at the office, and send the doctor a copy with the prices. That if I was in practice, that'd be wonderful for me. I could look down and go, good Lord, this isn't worth this much.
Sure.
Maybe I'll try this other medicine, but until we know, it kind of hangs the patient out to dry because they think, well, how come my doctor didn't know this? And here I'm down here.
Well,
I remember my aunt went for a prescription and she was so embarrassed because she didn't have the money. She had to leave the store.
Right.
And that was awful.
We have a call. I'm gonna
over the years. Okay, I'm sorry.
Let me take a quick call. Caller from area code 502. If you'd like to share your name, please do so. Welcome to the Doctor's Corner. What's your question for Mike and Dr. Kline?
Did you say 502?
Yes, it is.
Okay, this is Steve.
Hi, Steve.
To give the two gentlemen an example of the PBMs and their problems with kickbacks and whatnot, get a good example is I've been Silver Scripts, which is part of CVS. I had a prior authorization for 10 years on a particular medication, and they wanted to go back and prior authorize it again and go through all that stuff. And they told me the copay was $600 and change, which the tier it was in when somebody was paying $1,500, $1,600 in the final charge. And they were messing me around with the edit. So I called the independent pharmacy I normally go to, and I said, what's your cash price? $3.25. Silver Scripts said my copay would be $600 and change.
Mm-hmm.
So I called one of the warehouse stores. You want to take a guess how much warehouse store wanted for the same day supply and same medication?
What's a warehouse store?
Was your first example? Was you $3.25 an example of an independent store?
It was the independent store, but if I'd had the prescription billed to Silver Scripts, it would have been $600 and change at that same store.
Right. I would say to you that I would say the warehouse store is more.
No, $87.89.
Oh, is that right?
What's a warehouse
store? I saved
store?
enough on this one Costco.
Can you divulge to us the name of the drug?
It was generic for Provigil.
Okay, all right.
I saved enough on a year's supply. This is a chronic case. I saved enough on a year's supply on that to pay for the taxes and insurance on my house.
How do they do that, Mike? I mean, no matter where you go, they're still licensed pharmacists, right?
Yeah, but the one of the problems you have is the source of the wholesale cost of the drug, obviously. So you may wind up having a pharmacy dealing with a wholesaler. Obviously, we know what's going on the PBM side. They're just trying to get as much money as they can possibly get. What you find with independent stores, if they're buying from a smaller wholesaler, they're having to pay more money for it. if you look at a warehouse store, maybe what they've done is depending on which warehouse store you're working with or what big store you're working with or whatever, you may wind up having a situation where they're buying in a consortium, hence they're driving down the cost of the medication from the standpoint of volume of purchase, basically is what it boils down to. So, and you'll find also that those drugs differ. The drug you were discussing may be one type drug. Another type of drug may actually wind up being less expensive somewhere else. So you wind up having a situation where I've always advised patients, even patients who come to our store, if something is expensive, I've literally said, get on the phone, call around, and see what you can find out. Because you want to go, obviously, where you can pay the least amount of money for what you're buying. And it's just kind of like, we don't think of it this way, but it's true. In the market today, if you're paying cash, then you're paying cash for that as a commodity, just like you would be paying cash for a set of tires, or you'd be paying cash for something else that you're out there trying to buy.
What about these
places where it possibly that? Go ahead.
What about these websites that list the various prices and the different places? Are those just setups, or are they real marketplace ideas?
Yeah. You have to be very careful with those, because I don't know if you saw this, Dr. Kline, or not, but there was an article just last week that was talking about the FDA did a real sting operation trying to really determine which sites that you go on for the Canadian pharmacies.
Oh, yeah.
Their whole logic was how many Canadian pharmacies are real, and they found out that only about 10% of the people that we see online that say they're Canadian pharmacies are really Canadian pharmacies. They're in Belize, or they're in India, or they're somewhere else, and they're not, and you don't know what you're getting. I mean, you've seen all these reports on counterfeit drugs and so forth. I know I was in Washington one time, and the DEA was putting on a little demonstration for us, and there was probably 15 or 20 of us there, and they showed us 2 pills, and they said, tell us which one of these is the fake pill. And of course, as you might guess, the one that looked the best was the counterfeit tablet. And the other one was a real tablet. And, and they've shown that a lot of these medications are made from plasterboard and all those kind of things, so that they'll wind up keeping their shape and holding their shape in shipment and not crumble and so forth. So you can imagine that when people are taking those tablets, they are obviously getting no benefit from them. But they paid for them, so the people on the other end made their money.
So some good advice for people might be, if you're dealing with an expensive drug, maybe at least call 2 or 3 pharmacies. Always include an independent pharmacy. Would that be good advice?
Yes, that would be excellent advice. Okay. I do it all the time.
We have another caller from area code 570. What is your question?
Hi, it's Charlene Bedford. How are you?
Hi, Charlene. Good, thank you.
Good.
What's your question?
I'm out of Pennsylvania, and I'm actually a government contractor, and I work with these PBMs every single day. And to make matters worse, I can tell you firsthand, they have no idea what they're doing. Same company they don't even know, they'll ask us to change files, and we change the files. They don't even know they asked us to change them. It's just a disaster. But anyway, I'm on fentanyl patches, and recently they've changed the brands. And I know there's so much talk about the brands versus the generics and even the different, but the brands are so much different. And so apparently Sandoz, I've been told, is no longer making them, which used to be like the best. And I can only get this other brand, Apotex, which I've never heard about. And I'm just declining so fast on these medicines. I feel like I have no medicine at all. And I know that, the FDA approves these medicine and only allows, I believe it's 20% difference in actual medicine. And I just wanted to ask, first, do you know that to be true, that Sandoz is no longer making these? And what is the deal and the difference between these medicines? Because I can't imagine, for me, it's a difference of, walking and functioning or not being able to function at all.
On the same dose, right?
So,
yeah, on the same dose, Charlene?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Same dose.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
My question, first of all, would be, how long have you been using the fentanyl patch?
Sorry about that. Charlene, how long have you been using the fentanyl patch? Okay.
4 years.
4 years.
At least.
Have you
changed?
Have you changed the type that you've been using often during that period of time, or you've been on the same one all along?
Same one all along.
Okay. So is your pharmacy telling you that they can't get the Sandoz patch anymore?
They told me that they're no longer making them. That's what they said, and then they can't. They can't get it.
Yeah. Dr. Kline, I don't know about you, but I'm not aware that Sandoz had stopped making those, and that's not to say it's not true.
Well, one thing the thing I'm aware of is this horrible dishonesty from pharmacists. I mean, it's just awful. They're lying to people. I had pharmacists say that, oh, no, you can't get a prescription from out of state. So I called the pharmacy board, and they said, well, it's nonsense. We accept prescriptions all over the country. I honestly think these pharmacists are fibbing. I mean, it's just shameful to think the old druggist is fibbing, but there might be an example, Charlene. So, I'd call another independent pharmacist and ask them. Another opinion.
I think I would follow Dr. Kline's advice there for the simple reason I think we've seen over the last year or so, you've literally had some of the larger pharmacies taking the position that they're going to try to cut down on their usage of Class 2 medications because they're afraid they're going to get exposed to the DEA's review. And so their pharmacists are saying to them, to the patient, we can't get that, we don't have that product, so therefore you're going to need to get that somewhere else, or we're going to need to change you to something else. And so I think Dr. Kline is exactly right. I think the problem we're having today is that some of the larger pharmacies have gotten so caught up in the concern of the opioid crisis that they're turning people away, and they're doing what Dr. Kline says, saying we don't have this product or we can't get this product. And that's the reason I was asking you those questions. I would do just what he says. I would pick the phone up and I would call 2 or 3 other pharmacies, particularly a couple of independents, and ask them if they have these products. And tell them exactly why you're calling. Don't act like you're shopping because sometimes people get a little gun shy about that. But you just call them and say, "Here's what my problem is. I need to talk to you about this. Can you help me with this problem?"
The other thing
is that you'll find that people will be.
The other thing is that all the drug manufacturers are not evil, and some of them have 800 numbers. And I learned that a long time ago. If I've got a question as a physician, I call the 800 number, and they'll put me through to the research department, to the medical director. So you can call Sandoz. Call up Sandoz, look up the Sandoz 800 number, and give them a call. They've got great customer service. Most all the ones that I've called in the past, anyway.
Yeah, good idea.
Why do
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Why do they now need codes from the DEA, the doctor, and insurance when it's over for pain medication over 90 MMEs?
That's a new one.
One more time. I didn't hear all that.
Okay. So somebody from the audience wanted to know, why do they now need codes from the DEA, the doctor, and insurance company when it's over 90 MMEs for pain medication?
I haven't heard that.
You haven't?
Somebody's making it up again.
Well, I was going to say I'm not aware of any code that we have to provide. Of course, we have to go through the usual steps, and that is we have to. The NDC code that's on the drug has to be submitted, and the doctor's NTI number and DEA number have to be submitted, and those type things. But I'm not. That may be an internal restriction by a particular pharmacy company
or a benefit manager. Yeah, because remember now, the benefit managers, as Mike said in the beginning, receive a fixed amount of money from, let's say, IBM to take care of it. So if they deny medicines, guess what? They get to keep the money. It's a subscription thing. So it's, if they build IBM, it'd be different, but they don't. IBM says, I don't want to deal with this. So here's a $600 million, take care of it. So, hey, you can kind of see what happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if somebody...
one of the things that...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I was just fixing to say one of the things that, as we were discussing a while ago, that you have to remember here, and the general public doesn't think about this, nor do the doctors because they're not involved in it, is the fact that as these PBMs force prices higher, then they wind up creating a bigger copay to the patient. What winds up then happening is, particularly on Medicare Part D, is that as they force pharmacies to use brand name drugs instead of using generics. So now I'm dispensing a drug that ought to cost $25 and it costs $400. Mm-hmm. So now that $400 figure gets attributed to that patient's history. And in Medicare Part D, for example, as they go through the year, they get to a point that we hit the donut hole, what we all call the donut hole, which means that the federal government has paid a certain amount of money to that point for their medication usage. And once they hit that point, then they literally stop getting a benefit and have to start paying 100% of the cost of the medication.
Wow.
And so what the PBMs are doing there is because they're forcing people to dispense brands, they're driving these patients into the donut hole or to this no insurance coverage point much quicker.
Sounds like we need a congressional investigation.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So what happens here then is that patient then begins to pay for all the medication, and what happens with the PBM? They're continuous to charge the plan sponsor, the IBMs of the world, that same charge for filling those prescriptions, except the PBM is not paying out any money. So here again, they're taking the spread. Is what they're doing.
Yeah, it's the more I hear, the more. So prior authorization. I wanted to discuss that with patients so they kind of know what's going on. So if your benefit plan or your pharmacy plan says that you need a prior authorization, then what they do is they force us as doctors to become part of their rip-off plan. In California, when I was in California, Medicaid required prior authorization on some medicines, generally for good reasons. They gave us a phone number. We called up. Hello? It was a nurse. And the nurse said, what can we do? Okay, we need this. Okay, no problem. 3 minutes, I was off the phone. And that was a true prior authorization. They were doing that to be sure that we weren't, prescribing things where there was something else that was just as good, cheaper. But this is different. The other day, Purdue, I found out, which makes $1,800 worth of OxyContin a month, also has a factory making generics. Same company.
Yep.
So they said, oh, gee, right in the middle of a prescription, we can only give you half your prescription. We're not, there's no more generics. You need to switch over to the twice as expensive brand name. And then they forced me to fill out another prior authorization. Now, what this is you call up this phone number and you get people who don't know how to spell the name of the drug. And then you get passed on to a second person who you repeat all the information to. And I did this several times with a stopwatch. It's exactly designed for 25 minutes. So a doctor on the phone for 25 minutes is not seeing patients. And we are doing the work of the insurance company. So now, it's just totally out of hand. So explain to us, Mike, what's going on with this prior authorization stuff.
The first thing that's going on is that the PBMs have put the prior authorization in place to deter exactly what you just described. And from the standpoint of you saying, instead of me spending 25 minutes on the phone and prescribing this medication, I'll use something else. And so when you use something else, you're now using a product that they endorse because they're getting a big rebate on it. Mm-hmm. The drug they're making you jump through the hoops on is either not giving them any rebate or you're not giving them the rebate they think they should be receiving for that medication. So hence they put them in the back room saying we're not gonna do your meds unless we absolutely have to. So they work on the premise of that's what they're doing with the manufacturer, and what they're doing with the doctor is trying to say, Doc, if you're willing to spend 25 or 30 minutes on the phone with us, we'll talk to you about this, but wouldn't it be easier just to prescribe something else?
And usually when I spend the 25 minutes, I always get what I want. In other words, they're putting me through the hoop. I'm losing money in my practice, not seeing patients. It's too complicated for somebody else to do. I suppose a nurse could call, but they start asking you all these questions, and you got to repeat the patient's address and stuff. Yeah. And you can tell the whole thing is just a scam. But I want people who to understand what we have to do as doctors, and that it's dishonest. And now I was going to think of something I wanted your opinion on. If doctors started to charge the patients, say $25 for a prior authorization, do you think that the patients would scream and yell and then go to their benefit managers and say, what are you doing? I'm having to pay for this myself. And we look at it from the standpoint that this insurance contract is between the patient and the insurance company. And why am I being dragged into this? So I don't know if that would be fair, or it just kind of was a thought I had, mainly to bring more pressure on the benefit managers. I think that when doctors yell, it's not as effective as when the person who has the subscription or has the plan yells. What do you think?
Right. I agree 100%. I agree that the whole logic is, and I don't know if you recall this is a perfect example of what you're discussing here. Back in the early 90s, and I believe it was 92, 93, it was back before the PBMs were very much involved, and people were still mostly paying cash for their medication, and so people were shopping around. But what was happening is the manufacturers themselves then just continuously kept raising prices until every year they were going up 10, 15, 20% on medications. And so people literally began to themselves start an uprising saying something's got to be done about this, and they started calling the congressman. And so basically what happened is Congress called in some of the major manufacturers and said, if you don't do something about this, we're going to freeze prices, or we're going to start setting prices, one or the other. And so that was such a deterrent that the manufacturers made the deal with Congress that they would freeze prices for 2 years if they would just leave them alone. And so they actually did that. I mean, prices did not go up for 2 years. And then, of course, by that time, when they came back in, and that was maybe 94, I guess, or 95, by that time, there's about 35 or 40% of the general public and the working public, they were on some type of insurance program which provided prescription coverage. And that was back in the days when the copays were $2.50 and $5 and so forth. So they were very low. People loved them because then they didn't have to worry about what the actual cost of the medication was, because they only paid their $5 and went on their way. So that's when the PBM started to really grow. And so what you look at is that if there's a way to get the general public to understand what's going on here and what's happening to them, and you've got that kind of groundswell that we all would like to see, then I think it would be much more effective than you and I trying to lobby our members of Congress.
Get the folks who are receiving the service
back home. Yeah.
Right. Now, in the last couple of minutes,
back home are doing it.
In the last couple of minutes, what can people do if a pharmacist berates them in the pharmacy in front of people? 2, what should people do?
Call the Board of Pharmacy.
Board of Pharmacy.
Well, isn't Narcs Care going to be kind of like that?
Call the Board of Pharmacy.
Won't they be using
Narcs Care? Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think of that, Narcs Care? Are you going to use it if it comes out?
Okay, I've lost you there. I didn't hear.
Okay, there's a new program being sold by APRIS, who runs the state prescription drug monitoring program, and APRIS is now offering a new product to pharmacies that, for a fee, they will provide a risk score for overdose potential. So this is just getting started. It's under the radar. It's being pushed by the legislature. Apparently, we have purchased it. I cannot find out how much, but this is the latest thing in pharmacies. UNC proudly announced they were doing it. It's a profiling system, which is unconstitutional. You can't profile people.
Right.
Number 2, they're getting into people's medical records without their advice. So hopefully the independent pharmacies can, pick up the flag and carry with it about this APRIS NarxCare is the NARX CARE is their brand name.
I did actually read an article about that the other day, and as you look at our database system that we have in the state, obviously, as you know, you go in that database and it gives you a tracking record of what the patient has done over the last year, basically, as far as getting prescriptions filled, Class 2 prescriptions filled, and things of that nature, which helps you have a good idea of the patients you're waiting on. However, I'm not aware of anybody that has gotten the new system yet.
Okay.
But I would look forward to seeing that. Yeah.
Now, what should patients do when a pharmacist, probably not an independent pharmacist, just says, I can't fill this prescription?
Personally, if I were the patient, the first thing I would do is leave the pharmacy and go to another pharmacy and never go back to that pharmacy.
We got into a problem the other day that they wouldn't give up the prescription. It was passed over the counter and they refused to give it back to the patient.
Yeah, that's the Board of Pharmacy.
Board of Pharmacy time. Okay.
That's
Steve.
Yeah, because I mean, I can't take your prescription and refuse to give it back to you because it's your prescription.
Right.
Steve Arians, pharmacist
that would
Steve
be
from.
Like you handing.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Pharmacist Steve says Walmart starts NarCare program next month.
Oh.
Nationwide.
Okay. Good. Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So what's happening is they are basing their scores on the CDC data. The CDC data is based on street deaths, heroin street.
Gotcha.
How can they do that if they inflated the overdose
making
numbers?
Money. They patented it. They're making money, and they're telling that, oh, gee, all these people you have on your computer, now we can predict who's going to overdose. Problem is, addicts are not on the computer.
Right.
The people on the computer.
I was going to say the CD. Yeah.
Yeah, the people on the computer
CDC,
are not going to overdose.
Yeah. Yeah. The CDC statistics are wrong.
Right.
Yeah, but this company is now making dough and patented, and they people are eating it up. Oh, a score. See, now somebody has a high score for overdose, they are never, ever, for the rest of their lives, going to get a pain medicine prescription. Who's going to write them a prescription with some score that they're going to overdose?
Okay, so now, are you as a doctor going to be aware of this score?
No. Right now it's a secret. The Brandeis University spy program also generates reports, and they supposedly will send it to the doctor. But this is about the doctor. Now, this is about patients. Are the patients going to get copies of their reports? So far, our research has led us to believe no, but we're going to check in it some more. So you're going to be quietly profiled as a potential overdose based on data from addicts, which doesn't apply to the people on the computers. So people need to get on the phone immediately with their legislators and say, I want a copy of my NarxCare score immediately. Then when the legislators call over to the state, then they're going to figure out what's going on. And guess what? The taxpayers are paying for this, paying to be hanged by the APRIS company. So,
well, I mean, to your point, your point is right on target. And that is, they're using data that doesn't apply to that patient that walks in the door.
And confidential data.
Exactly. Yeah.
How did they get the ability to see they're using data from their own computer program? So the states all wanted
these. Say whatever happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Whatever happened to the HIPAA laws, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah, they're hippos, all right.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up here. So I'd like to give you both, a last chance to explain something or share something before we get going here.
Well,
Well, I would just simply go ahead, Doctor.
no, you go first. You're the guest.
No, I would just simply say that I think a point that we were just discussing a while ago, and that is that everybody that is listening to us tonight needs to understand that the general public does not comprehend, because they have no reason to know what's going on in their side, prescription in particular side, that's being dictated by a company that has nothing to do with the prescription itself. They don't handle the prescription. They don't prescribe the prescription. All they are is a processing company, but yet they're the ones that are actually now dictating what can be dispensed, to the extent of the things that we've been talking about tonight. And until we get rid of these folks and get the PPMs out of the picture, we're going to continue to see a deterioration of the process of healthcare on the pharmacy side.
So when people have trouble at the pharmacy with high prices and all the things we've been talking about, and they go to their legislators, which I really encourage people to do, they do listen, they really do listen, and say, we heard a radio show and we think this has something to do with the benefit managers, but we're not sure. But, just to give you an example, I called another pharmacy and gee, it was $65 instead of $600. And I think something's up. Could you check into it for me? That's what legislators like to do. They like to check into things for their constituents. Don't go ranting and raving and saying, I have a program to fix this. That's not what they say. Would you look into this for me? And if enough legislators look into it, they're going to find out that these benefit managers need to go.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Kline and Mike James, for joining us this evening on the Doctor's Corner. You guys really gave some informative information. And Dr. Kline, will we be talking about pharmacists next week again?
Sure.
Okay.
This is a big topic. I mean, a person's health revolves around the medicines they get. Good Lord.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do we have to, bring up these basic things? But we do. It revolves around the medicines we write. Somebody said once that the two magical things about a doctor sitting behind his desk is his prescription pad and his stethoscope, or her stethoscope. And so the prescription pad is how we make people better. And so the system has gone over the cliff, and it's gone over the cliff with bags of money, our money that we paid into the system, and they're keeping it.
Well, we just need to remember that the initial triangle is the physician and the patient and the pharmacist. So
Yep.
that seems to work well if they'll let us do our job, so to speak.
Yep.
Exactly. Well, both of you, both doctors and pharmacists, let you do your job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mike, thanks for coming, and really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it tremendously.
And good luck with your battles with the Congress.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, and thank you, Dr. Kline, for joining us this evening. Have a good night. Yes, have a good night to you both. I just want to remind the audience, tomorrow Carnation will be airing a rerun, and then next Wednesday, Claudia Morandi will be a guest. She's the founder of the Don't Punish Pain rallies, national rallies coming in September. I know they had a rally in the spring as well. Well, thank you, Carnation, for joining us on another Tuesday evening at the Doctor's Corner. I'm Jonelle Ogoy signing off for the evening. Good night.
You've been listening to The Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and Jonelle Ogoy. Copyright 2018 by EXG LLC. All rights reserved.